Hello and welcome back to another edition of the DVD Shelf Foreign Flix, the show that would rather high-five a good movie than rapid punch a bad one. Every movie I feature is one that I enjoy. However, not all movies are created equal, which is why I will use this scale to rate them. Today marks my 20th episode, and so in celebration of this monumentous milestone, I have a sextuple feature for you, as I will be covering 6 films that focus on the life of a revolutionary Chinese martial artist who was also Bruce Lee's first martial arts instructor. So, sit back and relax as I discuss Ip Man, Ip Man 2, Ip Man 3, The Legend is Born Ip Man, The Final Fight, and The Grandmaster. Ip Man has somewhat recently become widely known for being Bruce Lee's first martial arts instructor, but he is also the man that really helped the martial art of Wing Chun become practiced globally. He became the first person to publicly teach Wing Chun, with it previously being taught only via private lessons. And so without him making that decision, Wing Chun wouldn't be what it is today with over 4 million students. And perhaps even Bruce Lee wouldn't have become who he did, and thus the martial arts film genre would be drastically different. Though he may never achieve the level of martial arts folk hero status like the legendary Wong Hung and Huo Yunjia, both of whom have been featured or referenced in numerous films, Ip Man's contribution to the martial arts world is undeniably significant. So, with that in mind, let's get to the first movie, Ip Man. Released in 2008 and directed by Wilson Yip, the first Ip Man film follows the legendary martial artist as he tries to live a simple yet wealthy life in the Foshan region of China, an area known for its martial arts. This humble martial artist is well known and respected in the area, especially after he stops some troublemakers from out of town, led by the brute Jin, who are trying to make a name for themselves by beating up other martial artists in the area. However, his happy life doesn't last long as the Second Japanese Sino War impacts the area and the Japanese army takes over the city. Ip Man tries to adapt and survive without drawing attention to himself. Much to his chagrin, he catches the eye of the invaders and is sought out by their general for the purpose of aiding in the training of the Japanese army. This story has multiple branches, including Ip Man's close friend Chun trying to run a cotton factory, and after being beaten by Ip Man, Jin ends up forming a larger gang that terrorizes that factory. There is also a decidedly drastic tone shift when the war begins. The beginning of the movie has an almost campy, lighthearted charm to it for the most part, as Ip Man tries to keep his wife happy while still practicing martial arts. Even when Ip Man fights Jin, it has some comedy and lightheartedness to it. Then the war happens, and everything changes. Gone is the campy charm, and in its place we receive a bleak darkness as the war brought with it death, poverty, and desperation for the citizens of China, changing everyone's lives for the worse, including that of Ip Man. It shouldn't be a big surprise that one focus of this movie is the martial arts, and it is top-notch, making this one of my favorite martial arts films with some great choreography and brutal fights. And with such a heavy focus on martial arts, it's only natural they cast a martial artist in the lead role with the incomparable Donnie Yen as Ip Man, whom you may recall from my review of Wu Xia. Donnie Yen is known for action choreography nearly as much as acting, and has even been seen in American cinema, including Blade 2, Shanghai Knights, and Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. Even though Yen has trained in martial arts most of his life, he didn't train in Wing Chun until about 9 months prior to beginning the film. However, he proved to be a quick study and even impressed Ip Man's son, Ip Chun, with his ability to master the martial art. This film also features Hong Kong cinema mainstay Simon Yam as his friend Xuan, and Xu Wang Fan as gang leader Jin. Xu Wang is probably best known for the 1991 bizarre, over-the-top, and campy Rikyo, the story of Ricky, in which he was the star. And even though Donnie Yen is the clear standout martial artist in this film, Xu Wang is no slouch and performs well in the couple of action scenes he partakes in. So the big question, what would I rate this? Ip Man is a wonderful martial arts movie that tells the story of a modern legend, as exaggerated and inaccurate of a story as it is. It is highly enjoyable, delivering top-notch martial arts action with impressive choreography and a solid story to back it up. So, I give it a 5. Go out there and get it right now for one of the best modern martial arts movies out there. And it does have a US release, so it should be pretty easy to find. As far as special features go, I can't speak too much about the US release as I acquired my copy from overseas prior to it coming to the States. The US version does come with trailers, deleted scenes, and a making of. My version also contains a making of, and, saying it is the same as what the US release has, is a decent special consisting mainly of cast and crew interviews and some behind the scenes footage. As a direct sequel to that film, Ip Man 2 came out 2 years later and follows Donnie Yen's Ip Man once again as the martial arts master attempts to start up his first Wing Chun martial arts school after moving to Hong Kong. This leads to complications with other local schools, namely one run by Master Hung Chung Nam, who heads the organization of martial arts schools in the area. Eventually, this duo must get past their differences when a mutual villain presents himself in an aggressive foreign boxer named Twister. Yeah, he calls himself Twister and expects to be taken seriously. And he boasts about how great he is and how weak the Chinese are, leading to the showdown between martial arts and boxing, East versus West. During all of this, we also get some focus on a few side characters. The former gang leader Jin, who now has a job and family, Ip Man's friend Chun, who has fallen on hard times, and one of Ip Man's students named Liang. Now the real problem with this story for me is the conflict between Ip Man and Master Hung gets so much buildup, and instead of having a great conclusion, it just sort of fizzles right after they are interrupted during the beginning of a fight. And it fizzles just prior to the arrival of Twister, so it can't be blamed on that. And at about the same time that the Master Hung conflict fizzles out, the focus on Ip Man's student Liang also seems to just fade away, and Liang basically sits in the background for the remainder of the film. In order to up the martial arts credibility for the sequel, they decided to double the martial arts star power by adding Sammo Hung, the action director for both Ip Man and this film, as rival martial arts schoolmaster Hung Chung Nam, giving us a wonderful fight between these two aging icons, showing they both still have what it takes to perform lightning fast fight scenes at the approximate ages of 47 and 58 respectively. Sammo is probably best known as being a part of the classic martial arts trio of himself, Jackie Chan, and Yuen Biao, who together made a few films in the 80s that often contained impressive fight scenes and silly comedy, such as Dragons Forever and Wheels on Meals. He also broke into mainstream America when he became the lead for the 2-season run of Martial Law in the late 90s. Also joining the cast as Twister is the late Darren Shahlavi, a martial artist and stuntman who some of you might recognize as Kano from the Mortal Kombat Legacy web series. Unfortunately, the worst part of the acting of this film, and possibly the worst part about this movie period, is the English-speaking actors. Most come off as over-the-top and sound overdubbed, a phenomenon I am quite familiar with from other Hong Kong films with English-speaking characters.
That there is any Chinese fella that has the guts to get in the ring with me!
Unfortunately, Ip Man 2 falls into the stereotypical category of sequels not living up to the original, which is a huge disappointment considering how much I love the first one. The fight scenes, while still well made and fun, aren't quite as good as the original film, and I found the story to be less engaging and not as moving. It also doesn't help that the main antagonist of the last half of the movie is a bit too over the top for my tastes. So, I rated it a 3. Give it a rent sometime for a fun, though inferior, Ip Man sequel. And much like the first film, the US release comes with a behind-the-scenes making-of special, which is very similar in style and format, with cast and crew interviews and some behind-the-scenes footage. And much like the previous special, this one isn't anything in-depth or overly informative, but is still a nice little watch for fans of the movie. After Ip Man 2, it seemed like Donnie Yen hung up his wooden dummy and moved on to other projects, with him starring in numerous martial arts films over the next few years, though few of them were really standout. And then in 2015, he decided to become the iconic character once again with Ip Man 3. The story of the third film finds Ip Man still in Hong Kong teaching Wing Chun, now a well-known and highly revered martial arts master. Frank, an American gangster, looks to acquire land and terrorizes the school that Ip Man's youngest son attends, causing the legendary martial artist and his students to intervene and try to put a stop to it. Meanwhile, Chung Ten-chi, a lowly rickshaw driver and another Wing Chun practitioner who participates in underground fights for a little extra cash, wants to make a name for himself and prove that he is the true Grandmaster of Wing Chun. This leads to Ten-chi challenging Ip Man to prove who is the better fighter and deserving of the title of Grandmaster.
Wing Chun, Ip Man.
The prior two films had wholly outsider bad guy antagonists, whether it was the Japanese or British. And even Ip Man 3 does have the American businessman threat, but at the end of the day, the final antagonist for Ip Man is a man of his equal, a fellow Wing Chun master, which felt like a fitting end to the trilogy. Additionally, the final antagonists of the first two films were so clearly bad, and so I appreciated that this one gave us something different, as Ten Chi isn't so one-sidedly evil. He's just a man looking for a better life for him and his son, and for recognition he feels he deserves more than Ip Man. It was great to see Donnie Yen back in the saddle as Ip Man. However, much like the second film, this threequel never quite lived up to the first one, though for my money, I actually prefer it to the second one. The fight scenes were pretty great as Donnie Yen faced off against a plethora of talented opponents. There's also a slightly different feel to the fights. Even though director Wilson Yip returned once again so that he helmed all three of the movies, stunt director Sammo Hung did not return and was replaced by the legendary Yuen Woo-ping, who blew up in the US for his work in The Matrix, but he also choreographed some great martial arts films, such as Fist of Legend, Once Upon a Time in China 1 and 2, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Even though most people associate him with wire fu thanks to The Matrix and Crouching Tiger, the wire work is fairly minimal here, showing up about as much as it did in the prior films. Joining Donnie Yen this time around is Mike Tyson, who plays the gangster Frank, and Jin Zhang, also known as Max Zhang, as rival Wing Chun expert Chung Tin Chi. Tyson is well known as a controversial boxer who marks his action movie debut in this film. Quite honestly, I think he was one of the highlights of this film, with his fight against Donnie Yen being a lot better than I thought possible. The talented Jin Zhang also displays his skills wonderfully, showing his fighting prowess throughout the film. Zhang is a relative newcomer to martial arts films, only coming to my attention in The Grandmaster, which I'll get to in a bit, and then again in this film, and as the villainous warden in Killzone 2. It came out the same year as Ip Man 3. I'm a bit surprised that he hasn't had many notable screen credits to his name, as he clearly has talent, but I'm glad he's around now, and I hope to see more of him in the future. One aspect of this film that was publicized is the appearance of Ip Man's most famous student, Bruce Lee. Originally I heard they were going to use CGI to superimpose Lee's face over a body double, but in the end, after some legal issues, they settled for the 40-year-old Bruce Lee impersonator and actor Kwok Kwan Chan, who I remember best from Kung Fu Hustle. Honestly, I felt his inclusion was a bit forced and not all that important to the story, especially since the casual viewer might not even recognize who the character is supposed to be, given that they never used the name Bruce Lee. Perhaps if the character was more prominent, I could see the reason why he was in it, but as it stands, they don't really do anything fun or meaningful with him. He has to be Ip Man's student in the beginning of the movie, kicking a few cigarettes, then he leaves, not to be seen again until much later when he teaches Ip Man how to dance. Now, it's a cool idea to include Bruce Lee, I just wish they handled it better. Ultimately, this was a fun movie with some solid fight scenes. The story worked well with the two primary antagonists feeling different than the prior films, each of whom give Ip Man his two toughest fights in the entire series. And I really liked his final showdown to prove who is the best at Wing Chun. Even though I think the first film is still the best, I found this to be a fitting conclusion to the series. And I enjoy it a bit more than the second film, so I give it a 4. Go out there and buy it when you get a chance for this enjoyable threequel about the legacy of one of the greatest martial arts masters of our time. For the home release, they included a few different special features. There is another making of, just like the other movies, which consists of cast and crew interviews and behind-the-scenes footage. They also included some standalone and commentary-free behind-the-scenes footage and the full interviews with Donnie Yen and Mike Tyson, of which clips were used in the aforementioned making of special. The full interviews are just okay, with some of the answers either being one or two word or incredibly vague.
Tiger.
Overall, none of the specials are breathtaking, but for fans of the movie, they are an enjoyable enough watch. After the release of Ip Man 3 and the continued popularity of the film series, director Wilson Yip and Donnie Yen have talked and plan on potentially making Ip Man 4. No concrete details have been revealed thus far, and there are no guarantees that it'll even happen, but I know I would love to see Donnie Yen return. I just want them to find a good enough story to tell, since the third one feels like such a solid and fitting conclusion. Now, let's rewind a bit. After the success of the first Ip Man movie, another production team decided to get in on the craze and do their own Ip Man story, which has no connection to the Donnie Yen series. I mean, aside from being about the same man. This resulted in The Legend is Born Ip Man. It was released in 2010, the same year as Ip Man 2. The film begins when Ip Man is a small child, and he and his adopted brother, Ip Chi, begin learning from Master Chan Shun. And yes, you heard that correctly, his adopted brother in this film has the same name as his rival in Ip Man 3. Some time passes and illness claims the life of Shun, and their training is continued by the chief pupil, Ing Chung So. After many years, Ip Man leaves Foshan to study in Hong Kong, where he begins to grow a reputation for his martial arts skills. He then meets Liang Bic, the son of Shun's master, who teaches him some additional moves to further develop Ip Man's understanding of Wing Chun. He returns to Foshan with this knowledge where he must contend with the skeptical Master Chun and the scheming Japanese forces that have enlisted the help of his adoptive brother, Ten Chi, leading to a final confrontation that pits brother against brother. That's right, Ip Man once again clashes with a fellow Wing Chun expert named Ten Chi at the end of a movie, perhaps because both plot points were inspired by an actual event that took place. And this would be a good place to mention that none of the films in this review are historically accurate. There are things that certainly match up, such as Ip Man traveling to Hong Kong and opening his first official school there, and Ip Man did really learn Wing Chun from Shun, Chung, and Liang Bic. However, you should not take any of the movies in this review as a true-to-history retelling of Ip Man's life. Unlike the other series of films, the timeline for this one steadily moves forward, sometimes jumping years at a time, giving us snippets here and there before making its next jump. This works surprisingly well to give us a better picture of who Ip Man is, though I did feel like the love triangle, if you can even call it that, was an odd choice given that it doesn't get a lot of screen time and has no real payoff or point. Also, I found the conclusion to be a bit anticlimactic. After Ip Man confronts his brother in the Japanese forces, he must go rescue his friend from the Japanese ringleader, giving us a small fight. A small, underwhelming fight that has no business being the final fight in a martial arts movie. This movie also has a different choreography style. Sure, he still uses Wing Chun, but the action has more noticeable instances of over-the-top and wire-enhanced choreography. Even though the main star of this one is the virtually unknown Yu Hong-to, who actually had small roles in Ip Man and Ip Man 2, they brought in some bigger names to help round out the cast. Ip Man's real-life son, Ip Chun, plays Liang Bic, which is funny given that the son of a Wing Chun master is playing the son of a Wing Chun master. There are also a couple of names from the other Ip Man series, such as Su Wong Fan, who plays Ten Chi, and Sammo Hung, who plays their first master, Shun. In addition to them, as Master Chung is Yun Biao, who I mentioned earlier in this episode for his frequent collaborations with Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan. The acting typically works well enough, but I prefer Donnie Yen's performance to that of Yu Hong-to, both in his line delivery and his fight scene performance. In the end, I found this to be a fun martial arts movie with an okay story. The fights are fun and there are quite a few of them, but none of them compare to Donnie Yen's scenes. Likewise, the story works pretty well, but it does have some questionable components that hold it back. This is still a solid effort, it just could have been better, so I give it a 3. Give it a rent sometime for the only movie thus far that covers the early parts of Ip Man's life, as historically inaccurate as it might be. If you're expecting a Donnie Yen Ip Man movie, you'll be disappointed, but fans of martial arts will still enjoy the ride. As far as special features go, this one does contain a small making-of special that contains some behind-the-scenes footage, including pre-production rehearsals and interviews with the cast. After making Legend is Born, writer Erica Lee and director Herman Yau, who wrote and directed it, returned to make a sequel of sorts. They changed out the actors and covered a much later period in the life of the Wing Chun Grandmaster. And that resulting film is Ip Man: The Final Fight. Released in 2013, this film focuses on the later years of Ip Man's life after he travels to Hong Kong in 1949 and opens up a small and unofficial Wing Chun martial arts school. Whoa, this feels a bit like deja vu. We follow not just the man himself, but his students as life takes them down different paths during their training. We primarily follow Liang, one of the narrators of the film, and as in Ip Man 2, he is Ip Man's first student. We also focus on Sing, a police officer whose life leads him down a darker path of corruption. Much like Ip Man 2, they do have some conflicts with other schools. However, in this film, they also struggle with internal conflicts between the students, and eventually butt heads with the crime lord that rules over part of the city and has a stranglehold over some of Ip Man's students. The timeline of the film basically starts where Ip Man 2 did and continues on until after the timeline of Ip Man 3. But it tells a different story than either movie, with a few similarities. In fact, one thing I think Final Fight did better was the inclusion of Bruce Lee. He isn't in it much, only showing up at the end after he returns to Hong Kong once he'd become famous, and he meets with his master. But it's still a nice little scene that further accentuates the modest personality of Ip Man. Just like with The Legend is Born, this one steadily jumps through time, stopping to give us a glimpse of Ip Man and his students as time carries on and they all develop and change, making this very much an overarching tale of Ip Man's life and influence in Hong Kong, and by extension that of his students. This iteration also seemed more concerned with storytelling over fight scenes, which is apparent by the casting of Hong Kong A-lister Anthony Wong as Ip Man. You may remember Anthony from my Infernal Affairs review. And while mentioning Infernal Affairs, actor Eric Tsang, who played the mob boss in that movie, shows up in this film as a rival martial arts master, much like Sammo Hung did in Ip Man 2. Anthony Wong is an actor known more for his dramatic talents, and he lends his skills wonderfully to give us a much more nuanced and meaningful performance as the aging Grandmaster. However, as this is about a martial arts legend, some fighting is expected. And even though Anthony Wong isn't known as a martial artist, he still impresses, which is no surprise given that he practiced the art of Wing Chun almost every day for a whole year in preparation for the role. He may not be quite as impressive as Donnie Yen, or even Yu Hong To. However, the fights are still pretty fun, but one thing to keep in mind is that this isn't really a martial arts action film. It is much more of a martial arts drama, containing less fighting than the prior films in this review. As a complete package, I found this to be the better of the two Herman Yau directed Ip Man films, surpassing The Legend is Born in story and acting, which is primarily due to the different Ip Man actors. Even though I think the fights in the prior film are a bit better and definitely more frequent, here the plot and characters deliver a much more interesting and dramatic look at Ip Man, and so I'd rate it a 4. Go out there and buy it when you get a chance. And this does have a US release, so it's pretty easy to find should you choose to. And as far as the special features go, it is pretty sparse fare. Included is a theatrical trailer, cast and crew interviews, and a making of special. However, the making of appears to be a compilation of promotional videos made prior to the film's release, and it mainly consists of footage from the included cast and crew interviews. Now, let's change gears to a very different movie about the same figure. The Grandmaster was released in the US in 2013, and like Ip Man is to fight scenes, and the final fight is to story, the Grandmaster is to visual style. Before I continue, it should be noted that the version of the Grandmaster I own and am reviewing is the longer international cut, so it is a bit different than the version released in the US. This different take on Ip Man follows the Grandmaster from his humble beginnings in Foshan, where he bests a highly respected northern martial artist Gong Yu Tian, and soon after his daughter Gong challenges Ip Man to a duel and beats him in a somewhat sensual fight. After parting ways, they keep in touch via letters. Gong Yu Tian is then killed by his successor, Ma San, sending Gong on a mission for revenge. All the while, Ip Man travels to Hong Kong and establishes the first Wing Chun school. This is basically the same timeline as both Ip Man and Ip Man 2 combined. However, the Grandmaster clearly covers very different events. But I'll be honest, to me, this had the weakest and most unfocused story of any of the movies. There's a lot of title cards that progress the plot, along with many long drawn-out shots with not much happening. And for a movie called The Grandmaster himself feels like too small of a focus. Maybe Ip Man spoiled me, but I was hoping for a movie that actually focused on Ip Man. Instead, we follow Gong for long spans of time. We even focus on the death of her father at the hands of Ma San, whereas Ip Man's 2 daughters dying was given a brief dialogue-free scene with a simple title card. They hadn't even established that he had daughters in the first place. This film jumps around the timeline and characters, sometimes with little rhyme or reason, making it very inconsistent and sometimes hard to follow. There is also an awful lot of focus on situations and characters that don't have a direct impact, or any impact on the Grandmaster, such as the character named Razor. He seems like he's supposed to be important and is involved in the forming of a martial arts school, but he has no direct conflict or meeting with Ip Man at all. So why is he in the movie? Don't get me wrong, his fight scene was awesome, but really I felt like his presence was superfluous to the story. Now, it could be that this movie made more sense prior to being cut down, as the initial cut of the film is rumored to be around 4 hours, and with it being cut down to 2 hours and 10 minutes, there is a lot missing, and I think it shows. But, as I mentioned before, this film does have the best visuals, as director Wong Kar-wai employs magnificent sets throughout. But he does love his slow motion a bit too much for my taste. Much like Final Fight, the Grandmaster fills its ranks with dramatic actors, with Donnie Yen taking the lead role of Ip Man. If you've watched my show at all, then chances are good you're probably getting tired of seeing his name pop up. What can I say, he's a Hong Kong cinema heavy hitter, and he will be showing up again in my reviews. Joining Tony is Zheng Ziyi as Gong Zheng is probably best known for her roles in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, or House of Flying Daggers, but she has also appeared in American cinema, such as Rush Hour 2. Additionally, this film stars Chen Chang as Razor, whom you may recall from my Red Cliff review, and Jin Jiang as Ma San, whom you probably remember from a few minutes ago as one of the co-stars of Ip Man 3. Unsurprisingly, the cast does wonderfully, giving us some of the best acting of these films as well. As far as the action goes, this is my least favorite of the 6 films. While it does have some fun fights, they are not always filmed in such a way as to take advantage of the choreography and stunt work, relying too much on cutaway shots, close-ups, and slow motion. It also seems like a shame, as Donnie Yen spent a year training, 4 hours a day, and supposedly broke his arm twice. The best fights didn't even involve Ip Man himself, with my favorites from the movie being Razor vs. Many, and Ma San vs. Gong. There's also a lot of wire work, with choreographer Yuen Wu Ping utilizing more of the over-the-top style he's known for, as opposed to his more realistic work he did on Ip Man 3. So, what does that leave us? The Grandmaster is certainly far from perfect, presenting a disjointed and sometimes hard-to-follow story, but it has some of the best acting of the Ip Man movies and the best cinematography and visuals. The martial arts presented is pretty cool when we get it, but it is nowhere near as impressive as Donnie Yen's, and is definitely the most over-the-top and hindered by too many close-ups and slow motion. This is clearly the most artistic movie, taking a philosophical and poetic approach to the story and character. And that might work for some people, including the plethora of critics that seem to love it, but honestly, I just couldn't get into it as much as the other Ip Man films. So, I give it a 2. Check it out if it's free. And since I acquired my Hong Kong Blu-ray, it has received a US release with a shorter cut, so it is pretty easy to find should you choose to. However, as far as special features go, much like the first film I reviewed today, I acquired this from overseas a while before it came to the US, and unfortunately the version I have doesn't contain any special features with English subtitles, so I can't really speak to their quality. So in summation, if you want to see a film about the now legendary Wing Chun Grandmaster and Shifu to the immortally iconic Bruce Lee, then watch the Ip Man Trilogy starring Donnie Yen for a wonderful series of films containing the best martial arts out of all of them, with stories about struggle, morals, and martial arts itself. At the very least, you should watch the first movie, which is not only the best film about Ip Man, but one of the best modern martial arts films. Period. However, once you have watched the trilogy, I recommend seeking out Ip Man: The Final Fight for a solid story, great acting, including my favorite dramatic portrayal of Ip Man from Anthony Wong, and some fun, though inferior, martial arts. And I think you could just leave it there. But if you are still looking to get your Ip Man fix, then check out The Legend is Born Ip Man for a martial arts fest with a lesser story and acting, but one that distinguishes itself by being the only movie to focus on Ip Man while he was still learning Wing Chun. Lastly, if you really want to, check out the Grandmaster, but compared to everything else, be prepared to be disappointed as you enjoy the stunning visuals and cinematography and a few cool looking fights, but that's about it. Well, that'll do it for this episode. For the DVD Shelf Foreign Flix, this is Wong K. Ying reminding you not to piss off Donnie Yen.